my goodness, this whole time I have been muted. Wow. So let's start over. Hello, and thank you for joining me this evening for my book read. This is my first one. Um, and my newness at this just showed from I might be muted. So get me for that. So this is my book, The Kemetic Pagan Mysticism, calling forth the Heka of Kemet within the Mother Tongue. And this is backwards, so I do apologize for those who cannot see it. So I'm going to go ahead and read the back of it. I was muted, so now I am unmuted. So go ahead and read the back. And like I said, this is the textbook for the freshman class. So things are written out as lessons rather than chapters. Take your soul back to where you left the piece of your heart in ancient Egypt, Kemet. It's important to note that the culture and magic of this time is older than that of Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries. Many practitioners who acknowledge deity are those that acknowledge and revere this pantheon and do so without the knowledge that who they see are newer versions of the ancient deities of Egypt. So let's take a step upon this journey to learn of the true nature of the mythos behind the legends of the Niger, the gods and goddesses. Begin to bask in their presence and learn from a text that was written by Heka Ma'at Seminary's very own dean, myself. So, because it's the most descriptive, I'm going to read the first lesson. Looking back at ancient history, we have acquired knowledge that the ancient Romans formed their civilization through that of the ancient Greeks, and they from the ancient Egyptian. The Greek civilization began around 800 BCE, while the Roman had begun theirs around 753 BCE. Ancient Egypt had begun theirs thousands of years before. Research conducted by Robert Schoch gave a conservative estimate based on evidence shown by rain erosion that the Great Sphinx could date between 7,000 to 5,000 BCE. This could not have happened any time after due to climate change. The pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in the world, carved into the 5 pyramids in Saqqara, Egypt, date to 2550 BCE. It was in 5500 BCE that the ancient Egyptian culture had flourished due to the decline of technology, and this is the period that most people refer to when speaking of ancient Egypt. When we speak of ancient Egypt, we are technically referring to the narrow strip of land that followed the Nile River, termed the Black Land. Each year, the river would flood its shores, known as the inundation of the Nile, and the water would leave behind a dark black rich layer of soil that would act as a super fertilizer. Desert surrounding the valley of the Nile was referred to as the Red Land, as it seemed as if the desert land was attempting to swarm in on the surrounding fertile land. Pagans mark the season changes by celebrating the Sabbaths, solstices, equinoxes, and cross-border days. The ancient Egyptians did not celebrate these festivals, nor did they have any great significance within their own festivals. In Egypt, the harvest festival, or autumn, was in the spring. The seed planting or spring festival was in the autumn. Summer was the dead time of the year. Summer was the dead time of year, which was their winter, and winter was the time of fertility, which was their summer. This was caused by the inundation of the Nile. Excuse me, one moment. My cats are running. I do apologize. Okay, this was caused by the inundation of the Nile. Due to this, we can observe that Egypt's Midwest was connected to its own natural environment. There was some minor significance with the natural life around them, as the gods they believed in was infused together, just as many of the faith today believe. From the text, the Book of the Celestial Cow from the 19th dynasty, also the Times of Ramses II, describes this. The soul of Shu is the air. The soul of Nihe is the rain. The soul of Asar is the ram of Mendes. The soul of Sobek is the crocodiles. The soul of every god resides in serpents, and the soul of Ra is found throughout the land. Ancient Egypt was divided into two separate lands. Upper Egypt, given the name the Black Land, and Lower Egypt, the Red Land. There is a cosmological correspondence to this separation as well, with ancient Egypt serving as a blueprint. Upper Egypt was an image of the heavens, and the Nile as an image of the Milky Way, ruled by a summer. The Red Land is seen as the domain of Set. During the summer, the heat would kill all vegetation in parts of the earth. It would seem as if the desert threatened to encroach on the habitable land, much like Set murdering his brother. At the end of the summer, the Nile would flood, which corresponds to the heliacal rising of Sirius, the stone, all Set. Ma'at restores order to the land after the devastation. Newly planted seeds begin to sprout as a song, and all Set restores him to life and conceived their son Herod. Therefore, the seasonal religious rites of Egypt more so celebrate the actions of the Netjeri, the gods and goddesses, both as were in the Septepi for the first time, or creation, and as these actions are repeatedly made manifest in the workings of nature. For the Egyptians, family life is valued highly. As we do today, they consider their children a treasure, regarding them as a great blessing. And as parallels today, lower class families would have a mother raising children. Excuse me. I apologize about that. So for the Egyptians, family life is valued very highly. As we do today, they consider their children a treasure, regarding them as a great blessing. And as parallels today, the lower class families would have a mother raising children, while the rich and noble had slaves and servants who took care of the daily needs for the children. For childless couples, there were daily prayers to the Netjeri, along with visits to relatives' tombs to leave them letters asking them to intercede on their behalf with the gods. Magic was also an option for those who could not conceive. So magic was also an option for those who could not conceive. In the end, if all else fails, there was adoption. Boys were taught their trades or crafts from their fathers or an artisan. Girls worked and received their training mostly from their mothers. Families of wealth sent their sons to school to learn a plethora of subjects starting at the age of 7, and these subjects included reading, writing, arithmetic, and religious studies. There had been no found evidence of schools for girls. However, they were homeschooled and did learn to read and write, with some who eventually made it to practicing medicine and other important professions. The structure of the Egyptian family dictated that children were expected to care for their parents when they got older. The order of inheritance was that the boys would be granted the land, then the girls would be granted the household goods and jewelry. If there were no inheriting sons, nothing prevented the daughters from being granted the lands. There is some evidence of women who have inherited entire nomes or villages. There was fair equality among the genders. However, women were expected to obey their fathers and husbands. Women had rights to business dealings, ownership of land, and were expected to represent themselves in court. Penalties under law were also the same for women as they were for men. As with cases of power, the wives and mothers of the kinds, or pharaohs, were the usual real power behind the government, though it seems this fact was kept from the common people. Queen Hatshepsut was the only woman who ruled Egypt outright, as she declared herself pharaoh. Most women did choose to raise their children and perform housewifely duties, yet there was also the opportunity for them to hold jobs. If the home was missing the husband or sons due to a campaign or war, the women easily ran their farms and businesses. Some positions that women could hold were in courts, as maids to the noble, perfume makers, acrobats, dancers, singers, musicians in the temple, and even professional mourners. Although only noble women could become a priestess. Marriage for peasant girls usually occurred around the age of 12, while most boys were a few years older. Noble and affluent girls had the choice to marry later. Most marriages were arranged by parents, with some exceptions made where young people were able to choose their own spouse. Monogamous marriages were the rule among ordinary men, while it was perfectly acceptable for the pharaoh to have several wives. There were prenuptial agreements before almost every marriage that stated the terms of the wife's allowance, and that whatever she brought into the marriage was hers to take if the marriage was dissolved. Both could own land independent of each other. However, the wife usually gave the power of administration over to the husband. Divorce was an option, though it was not common. In the case of domestic abuse, the wife could go to her family, which in turn would always try to either talk to the husband or support the wife in divorce. Egyptian divorce was simply a matter of making a statement of annulment in front of witnesses. In almost every case, the wife won custody of the children and was able to marry again if she chooses. Food preparation was done in clay ovens and an open fire. Although scarce, wood was used for fuel. Like today, food could be baked, boiled, stewed, fried, grilled, or roasted. Beer was the most popular beverage, and bread and barley were staple foods in the Egyptian diet. The beer was brewed from barley. The process consisted of the barley being left to dry and then baked into loaves of bread. The baked barley loaves were broken into pieces and mixed with dried grains in a large jug of water and left to ferment. Although the Egyptians did produce wine, it only found its way to the tables of the wealthy. Bread was made from ground wheat flour, which was produced into a fine grain. Herbs such as sesame seeds, honey, fruit, butter, and others were used to flavor the bread. Their plumbing was set up so that the water would drain into the gardens. There was no soap, instead a cleansing cream which was made from oil, lye, and perfume was made. The Egyptians used cream to keep their skin in shape in the arid climate. Oil or fat products were mixed with scented flowers or oils, and then put in a pot and fermented until the scent had been absorbed by the oil or fat. Party time would see servants massaging or placing greases of this nature on guests' foreheads. As the grease became room temperature, it would melt down their faces, providing a cooling effect. Everyone in Egypt had also worn makeup. The Egyptians' eye paint was made from a green malachite and galena, or lead, in the color gray. Once powdered, they were mixed with oil to make the eye color known as kohl. As with many other things in society, it was believed that they had magical or healing powers. The belief that eye infections could be cured using this kohl was one example. For lipstick, rouge, and nail polish, rose ochre was ground and mixed with water. Henna was also used as a nail polish, giving the colors orange and yellow. Almost all Egyptians wore not only wigs and makeup, but also some type of jewelry. Amulets, seeming like the jewelry of choice. A siege page just popped up onto my lap, so let me show you the video. So continuing. They had thousands of amulets, some of the most popular being the Ujat, or the eye of horse, the scarab, the Jed, or the pillar or spine of Osiris, and the Ankh. There have also been found items related to the relief of replication and substitution. These were known as shabtis. Shabtis are tiny servitors made of clay who would grow and harvest crops in the next life, and as commanded, serve the dead. Both men and women wore earrings, armlets, bracelets, anklets. These lovely jeweled and beaded necklaces, so often seen depicted in Egyptian art, is called rasek. Clothing made from many different types of materials. Clothing was made from many different types of material. Men's skirts were kilts, with the richer men wearing theirs pleated. Women's dresses were usually straight-fitted and held up with simple straps. Clothing for children in the summer months was optional, while working in the hot sun would cause a man to wear a loincloth. Ancient Egyptians spent their free time in a multitude of pastimes, which are predominantly pictured on many walls and tombs. Plays were held in temples. However, the biggest sport and activities centered around the Nile included fishing, riverboat outings, swimming, hunting, specifically crocodiles and hippos, and a boat game which consisted of two teams of men jousting. Being religious in the Egyptian culture was a way of life, a life of spiritual acts. Every action, every thought, every word was an offering to the Netjeru that the individual had worshipped. One of the names for the country given by the people is Ta Netjeru, which means lands of the gods. This name was given for several reasons, all of which seemingly reflect into each other. It reflects that the religion of Egypt was all pervasive. It shows that the religion and spirituality were intrinsic in everything that they did. And it proves that to the Egyptians, it was taken for granted that everything was a spiritual and religious significant act. The unification of the soul with the gods in natural life was a vital approach to the ancient Egyptian spiritual identity. An early funerary inscription delineates this association. From coffin text number 330. If I live or pass on, I am a Sar. I enter you and appear through you. I decay in you and I spring forth from you. I descend into you. I repose on my side. The gods are living in me as I live and grow in the emmer that sustains the exalted one. The ancient Egyptian culture may seem rather strange to us. Images that have survived seem rather aloof and impassive in their form. There are anthropomorphic entities and beings whose theophany was such, which the Greeks found rather grotesque and despicable. Amongst the utmost importance to Egyptians were cleansing rituals. Most people bathed daily in the river or out of a basin at home. Only the wealthy had a bathing area. Their bathing rituals would consist of their servants pouring water over their masters. This would be the shower that we know of today. The upkeep or maintenance of the unity created by these devotions occupies the time and resources of all members of Egyptian society in a form that we see most associated with ancient Egypt, that of sacred ritual. This activity was performed in a clearly prescribed canon on all levels of society, and generally was unaltered over the course of thousands of years of recorded history. The Netjeru traveled to Britain in the form of the cult of Isis, and brought over by the Romans nearly 2,000 years ago, knowing that Esianism at that time would easily spread throughout the Roman Empire. The goddess Isis flourished, becoming, in the words of the second writer, Apuleius, Deorum Deorum qui facis uniformis, which means all gods and goddesses in one form. She was also given the title Myrionymus, which means having 10,000 names, because she was thought to be all deities of all cultures and all pantheons under their various names. She then became the supreme being, and her cult was such a serious rival to that of Christianity that it was never completely restored, even when paganism was suppressed by law. Rather, it became incorporated as the cult of the Virgin Mary. Roman culture permeated out from military centers to the population, carrying with it religious and spiritual ideas that became synchronized with native beliefs. It became assumed that Esianism would have found converts among the Britons, because when the Roman army left Britain after 300 or more years, many Roman assumed Esiacs stayed, integrating into society. Esianism was an urban form of the Egyptian faith. The temples tended to be in the city centers near the marketplace, where the people had access. Due to this, Isis became the champion of the poor, the suffering, and the sick. She had identified her life with the earthly trials and hoped to overcome adversity, and hopes for us to overcome adversity, as she had done with her life. Wherever we gaze at the winter sky, we can see the celestial form of a star, the constellation of Orion, the one who strives hard to the limit of his desire. We can also see Alset as Sirius close behind him, never too far away, the brightest star in the heavens. And in the summer, we see Hathor as the sun. Religious rites performed by the priesthood did not take place in nature, but in massive stone temples. Therefore, it is appropriate to perform inside. The Egyptians were religiously conservative, preserving rituals, prayers, deities, and customs to a certain way of thinking, which may seem to have long outgrown their usefulness. There's little material available to those who wish to conduct authentic Egyptian rites and rituals. However, there is currently a tradition within the pagan community termed Kemetic Orthodoxy that attempt to replicate the worship and practices of the ancient Egyptians. What one can find comes from chiefly the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, in the Book of the Dead, as well as communication with the Nigeria themselves. The pyramid texts, the oldest of the three that dates 2550 BCE, or the Pertem Huru, also called the Book of the Dead, also known as the Book Coming Forth by Day, was compiled about 1,000 years later. Coffin texts were embellished on sarcophagi, hence their name, from as early as 2nd millennium BCE. When one starts to read Egypt's literature, it seems like a hallucinogenic dream, much like Dr. Seuss, but with a less childlike audience. Everything shifts and changes, one thing becomes another, Nigeria having many forms and many names, and the witch becoming them all. In the oldest text, it is the king who has the powers of the shaman, commanding the forces of nature and having the ability to travel through the realms of the gods. By the time the Book of Coming Forth by Day was compiled, others had sought entry into the realms. However, to do so, they needed the correct passwords to pass through the gates. In the temple, the high priest is seen as the physical representation of the god on earth, and outside the temple, a powerful witch, and so the pharaoh was seen as the same. All their religious rites were solely performed by him. However, it was through the agency of the priest that Heka came into play. Pharaoh's entire life, every single step and breath, was a religious rite. In the morning, he takes a ritual bath, dresses in ceremonial robes, walks the ceremonial staircase to the temple of the morning. It was believed that if he did not do this, the sun would rise, and a path of the dark serpent of chaos would overwhelm the light and truth. The divine order of this world, personified as the measured rod, and the foundation of the world, would be overwhelmed and engulfed in the waters of moon chaos, the Morgan Ocean. It was unthinkable that anyone holding a position of public office would not be a skilled witch, as Heka was institutionalized in the highest echelons of society. When you read the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead, we see that these beliefs were held throughout life and apply as much in this world as the next. In the pre-civilization time, people found living in the Nile River Valley provided them a safe environment. The Nile River Valley was a rich area because of the annual flooding of the river. Over time, various groups organized themselves into two separate governments called the Upper Kingdom and the Lower Kingdom. About 3100 BCE, Menes, the ruler of Egypt, conquered the Lower Egyptian Kingdom. Menes united and became the first ruler of both Upper and Lower Egypt. And it was where the two kingdoms met that he built the capital, Memphis. To the people of Egypt, The ruler, later called Pharaoh, was more than a king. He was considered by many to be a god. As a god, Pharaoh was believed to possess the secrets of heaven and earth. The Pharaoh was a living embodiment of the Egyptian gods, and this is why the Egyptians considered his power absolute. The Pharaoh was responsible for all aspects of Egyptian life, keeping the irrigation works in order, directing the army, keeping the peace, and issuing laws. He controlled trade and the economy. The base of the Pharaoh's power was his control of the land. The Pharaoh owned Egypt's mines, quarries, and the trading fleets that sailed to foreign lands. Foreign merchants had to deal with royal officials, not with the merchants of Egypt. Many officials were appointed to supervise the details of the government. The most important was the vizier, also known as the chief overseer, similar to that of the prime minister. His job was to carry out the orders and decisions of the pharaoh, and he acted as a diplomat in the royal court, oversaw tax collection and public works. Under the vizier were governors who controlled the local nomes to which Egypt was divided. Beneath the governors were scribes and overseers. The scribes were keepers of the records, while the overseers supervised the farming of the land and the peasants. Government and religion were inseparable in Egypt. In Old Europe, their magic consisted of working with power totems and using plants for magic and healing. However, their most important form of magic was protective. The ancient Druids believed that each species of tree and plant had its own symbolism and power. Drawing from folklore, some popular talismans and amulets they had were holy stones, rowing twigs, and iron nails. The Greeks rediscovered the wand, practiced necromancy, and performed voodoo-like curses. Also in their repertoire was the practice of folk magic. According to Scott Cunningham, folk magic is the practice of projecting personal power as well as the energies within natural objects such as herbs and crystals to bring about needed change. You can find that definition in his book, The Truth About Witchcraft Today. In the New World, Native Americans had their form of magic. Here we tend to call it impersonation. An example would be when they put on deer horns and a deer hide and act like the deer to catch food. They also had the practice of shamanism. And then others brought the practice of Pennsylvania Dutch with their hex signs for protection and good fortune. Then from the Ozarks and Appalachian Mountains came powwow. Other types that entered the New World include Candomblé, voodoo, Santeria, and Kabbalah. After the passing of both world wars, the interest in the occult intensified. A man named Gerald Gardner, British civil servant, was creating modern-day Wicca. This had quickly spread around the world, including North America. At the same time, other groups, such as the Sancho, Druidism, and goddess spirituality, had appeared. As cliche as this sounds, this is a topic that needs to be discussed. The old religion, as it was originally known before Christianity became big on the scene, coexisted with the new faith together at first. In fact, early Christianity borrowed quite a bit from the early religion, using native customs, raising churches on pagan sacred sites, and allowing country people to continue going to Essex and Sounds as long as they continued to go to church on Sundays. By the 7th century, Christianity had become a fanatical religion, and the continued influence of another religion side by side with the church became troublesome. The church wasn't satisfied with the figure of a vague antichrist. Thus, he took the shape of the identity of the horned devil, a mixture of the ancient Phoenician deities Beelzebub and Baal, the Greek deity Pan, and the Gnostic deity Baphomet. Roman Emperor Constantine, once a practitioner himself, quote unquote, converted to Christianity and declared the practice of magic illegal. As the religion of Christ moved throughout Europe, overzealous churchmen and rulers lashed out against those who went against the church's authority. Those who were attacked include, but are not limited to, Gnostics, Cathars, pagans, Albanians, Jews, Waldensians, Muslims, Knights Templar, gays, witches, and the list continues on and on. Torture, physical sufferings, and punishment for one's sins were part of the medieval thinking, and so the devil visited all those things upon the poor souls that he had managed to snatch. The church forcibly claimed witches had a compact with the devil and were therefore his associates. The Pope, by 1485, had been persuaded to persecute them en masse, and from there on, hundreds of thousands of innocent people were killed in some of the most horrible ways. In one instance, there was a number of 50 to 100,000 victims. Their reasoning for this capture and torture, the devil in the text of the Malleus Maleficarum. There were two great waves of witch huntings. The first from the 15th to the 17th century, and the second being the late 17th century, when the Puritans decided to equal their Roman Catholic brethren in ferocity, both of which were a carnival of death, sparing neither high nor low. Accusation of witchcraft was tantamount to conviction, and many people got caught up in the bloodshed simply because a neighbor wanted something bad enough to accuse them before the authorities. Also, the belief in the devil was so universal that anyone who denied such a belief would automatically convict themselves. The accused witches were inevitably forced to confess to the strangest of activities, which, under torture, they did. By the dawn of the 19th century, the Age of Reason had also brought light in respect to witchcraft persecutions, and the witches and cowens were finally left alone. But so deeply had the church and local courts left their scar that freedom from persecution did not automatically encourage their return to light. It was not until 1951, when the ancient witchcraft acts were finally revoked in Britain, did the craft establish itself once again above ground. Then along came Gerald Gardner, considered the father of Wicca. Paganism is an umbrella term for the pre-Christian religions of Europe. Most pagans believe in a divine force or power as the source of all. It is both immanent, meaning remaining within, and transcendent while encompassing the whole universe. Therefore, the world and all aspects within the world, nature and life itself, are considered sacred. Paganism is, and has had, a deep appreciation for nature. It is light and shadow and all that lies in between. It is being in the presence of Mother Earth and giving reverence. When we are in the temple of the Nigeria, we are not prone to the arrogance of human technology as they touch our souls. Witchcraft is a spiritual system that fosters the free thought and will of the individual, encourages learning and understanding of the earth and nature, thereby affirming the divinity in all living things. Most importantly, however, it teaches responsibility. We accept responsibility for our actions and deeds as clearly a result of the choices that we make. We do not blame an exterior entity or being for our shortcomings, our weaknesses, or our mistakes. If we mess up or do something that brings harm to another, we have only ourselves to blame, and we must face the consequences resulting from those actions. A polytheistic spirituality, pagans believe in the divine polarity of the goddess and God existing in all things, in the trees, the rain, the flowers, the sea, in all of nature's creations, and in each other. This means that we must treat all things of earth as an aspect of the divine. We must attempt to honor and respect life and all its many manifestations, seen and unseen. This does not mean that we must all be vegans or vegetarians, simply that we must respect that we are eating another creature that once lived, and we are grateful for its sacrifice. To communicate with this deific force, pagans believe it to manifest in the form of the goddess and the god. As they emanate from the same source, they retain equal power, thus equal status. By manifesting power into two deities, the natural polarity is retained. Each opposite is essential to maintaining balance and rhythm of life. We learn from and revere the gifts of nature from divine creation by celebrating the cycles of the sun, moon, and the seasons. In the festivals we call Sabbats, we celebrate the solar holidays and devotional days to the gods. In Esbats, we revere the lunar forces and all of life and the magic that they contain. We search within ourselves for the cycles that correspond to those of the natural world and try to live in harmony with the movement of its universal energy. Our teachers are the trees, rivers, lakes, meadows, mountains, and animals, as well as others who have walked this life on the earth. Paganism has no high authority, no single leader, no prophet, and no Bible to dictate its laws and beliefs. However, each witch and coven will have its own rules to govern that individual group. Every witch is as important as another. Most witches are solitary practitioners, but there are also many covens. Covens can also be called temples, groves, lodges, circles, hives, and a few other terms. Traditionally, these held no more than 13, equaling out to the 13 cycles of the moon each year. Sorry, Kitty was trying to get on the team. Today, covens are a minimum of 2, and there technically is not a maximum. Covens are normally presided over by a priestess and a priest who has years of practice in magic and ritual technique. These are respected as an elder and teacher of the craft. Paganism is not a missionary religion out to convert new members to think the same way as we do. We are willing to share our experience and knowledge within to those who seek our wisdom and perspective. Sorry, Julian. We believe that anyone who is meant for this path will find it through their own search, their own personal journey. As far back as history and archaeologists allow us to see, the practice of witchcraft has always been there. The Pharaoh blessed the crops as Amun-Ra. Moses parted the Red Sea in Jehovah's name. The Delphi oracles delivered the wisdom of Gaia. The wisdom of Apollo did other oracles bring. And today, it is up to us to carry on their magics. So that was the first lesson of Kemetic Pagan Mysticism. Also, the first lesson, if you are interested in joining the seminary, that would also be your first lesson in the basic core course. So I appreciate those of you who joined me this evening. Thank you so much. If you are interested in hearing this again, it will be uploaded to our YouTube page, Mystical Order of St. Cyprian, up underneath the Ravens and Magic playlist. If you are interested in purchasing the book, it is available on Amazon, or you can reach out to me for a signed copy. Right? I hope you all have a blessed evening.